So some assumptions that I'll make. I do tend to go a little more quickly on these Workshop Wednesdays, so log in and type along if that helps you absorb the information a little easier. I'm assuming that you know the basic workflow features. Not going to go into those, explaining those in detail today. It's more going to be about how to apply the features in the quality rule approval environment. Again, any knowledge, any license type is welcome on the call. And if any of this is just, you're interested, you like it, but you couldn't quite follow along, just schedule a consultation, send an email to support@datacookbook.com and either ask for me personally or just request in general a consultation on the topic that you're interested in, because we do want to, we don't want your inexperience to get in the way of your ability to activate and implement some of the things you see in today's program that you think would benefit your institution. So, quality rules, just the basics. What are they? Well, they are a written down record of a decision that you make regarding what the quality of data that you are willing to accept or that you want to establish. And they are two types. There are technical rules and business rules. Technical rules are about the data must be in a certain format, a certain digit. It must be 5 digits, it can't be 4, or it must be complete. I can't have a fragment of the information, it must be complete information. Other kinds of technical things are, it can't be null, but the data must actually exist. There must be gender for everybody, for example. Business rules are written, can be quality rules, but they're written to support a business process. So a quality rule that's measuring the enrollment level of international students who must stay above a certain threshold of credit hour enrollment in order for their visa to remain valid. At the moment, they perhaps inadvertently drop a class. Well, they drop a class, and that inadvertently drops them below the threshold that keeps them maintaining their visa. You want that flag to go off and to be alerted to that situation immediately. So you would create a quality rule that was looking for that certain flag of type of student, certain type of enrolled student, and what their credit hour threshold was. So when the data didn't match that anymore, that would trigger the breaking of the rule and you would receive notification. So those kinds of rules, to me, I call those business process support rules. And I want you to consider those under the umbrella of quality rules. Other basics are that writing them down is the starting point so that you can manage the change around fixing the broken data. And then writing it down and recording it in a catalog, that becomes the artifact that everybody can focus on, and it will help you manage that change. The fifth point is give some consideration to who writes them. Typically, it's the data steward, the person who's also in charge of the definitions and the glossary information, but it can be someone dedicated to quality work. And then the last one is just a reminder that quality rules are a single milestone in the whole quality management process. And so I'm only going to talk about a part of the quality management process and try not to distract myself by talking about the other parts. So in Data Cookbook, we offer a catalog of quality rules, and this is a snapshot of what a specific rule looks like. This particular example is called Athlete Gender Can't Be Null, and it was written because NCAA athletes had to declare a gender, and in my fictitious university, all the regular students, if you were not an athlete, you did not have to have a gender on file. You could be null if you were a regular student, but per NCAA rules, athletes must declare. And so this rule is checking to see if you are a student status of student athlete and you are representing the school, that you have to have a gender. So the top part of the rule, the name of the rule and the description and the type that it is and the severity of the rule, all that descriptive metadata about the rule, that's kind of above the scroll bar, above this bar, if you will. And that's typically the section that's provided by the data steward or someone who works in athletics, a business person who needs this data to be of a certain quality or a certain type. Also, the functional area is selected, and then if you want to relate it to any existing definitions, you can do that as well. Below this bar is the technical information, and there's two types of technical information. The top part here is indicating the query language that you need in order to execute the rule. So specifically, what is that student status label for student athlete, and where is the field that gender is recorded, and is it or is it not null? So that's the technical, and it's tied to a specific data system. You could check for gender across multiple data systems. In this example, we're just looking in the student athlete system, and we're looking in the athlete gender column, et cetera. So that's a technical area. The second half of that technical piece is the what's called the threshold and the score, if you will, of how the data meets that threshold. So in this example, of course, I dramatized it, and it's a low score. There were 40% of the rows tested failed the rule. So that's a high failure rate. So it's got a low score that's indicated there by the red flag. So the three main parts of the rule, the functional piece, and then the technical piece, which has two parts really, the query stuff, and then the threshold and the results of the data measured against the rule. For workflow, the workflow in Data Cookbook for approving this rule focuses on the functional piece and this first half of the technical information. The threshold and measuring the data against the rule is not part of the workflow. It's just a task of running the measurement of the data. That's considered a separate task, and you run that and get your results against the approved rule. Let's take a quick peek over into Data Cookbook itself. Here is the quality section in the Enterprise Edition, and the catalog of rules is laid out very similar to definitions. Your typical filters are available, functional area, etc. Rule severity is an attribute that each client sets, and you can use your own language to set that. And then the rules themselves list, again, similar to the way definitions and specifications list. And then to click on the title, you will see the actual rule, which was the screenshot that I just showed in that slide you have in the slide deck. Clicking on the Show Workflow, that's going to expose the specific workflow that's being used to approve this rule. It has two milestones, two stages, drafting and review, and then it goes to the approved state. That workflow of drafting and then the review process is the default workflow that is delivered to everybody's Enterprise Edition Data Cookbook. This blue chart gives some information about how you might want to assign people to play a role in those two stages. In the drafting stage, from a Data Cookbook perspective, the role name, which might be how you label your user groups or set permissions within that user group. So the language might be quality rule editor, data steward, or any other generic types of editor roles that you have defined. In real life, the job name for these types of people, they could be a DBA, could be an assistant registrar, could be the bursar, higher level, could be a parking attendant. So in the drafting stage, iData's perspective is that it's a wide range of people can start a quality rule. If you are dealing with data and the data isn't clean, and that's a problem for you in your job, that you could come to Data Cookbook and submit a request for a rule that would clean up that data for you and make your job easier, more accurate. So the type of person who could submit a rule, from our perspective, would be very broad. In the review stage, that is a more specific type of expertise. And so the role names of the people who perform that task would be a data manager, or perhaps you were able to define a quality manager. In real life, those job titles would be registrar, director, bursar, again, vice president, typically people at the manager level or above. And they would be providing the review of that rule and then providing the final approval. So that's the default workflow. And from an administrative side in the Data Cookbook, if I were logged in as a star athlete, I could submit that rule, and then it would be routed to the data steward for athletics, who would then perform the review. And if I open workflow, you can see I've progressed to the review stage. And that data steward would review it, provide the technical information, and then approve the workflow. I think I'm not logged in as, I'm not logged in as star, so I'm not actually going to be able to approve it. Let's take a look at what that workflow looks like from the administrative side. So if I call this side, this is the side that the user sees, the participant in the workflow. The administrative side, if I click on I navigated by clicking on the name of that rule. I could also navigate by going to the organization tab, workflows, and locating the rule that way as well. The fastest way is just to click on the rule name from within that rule. So here's my picture. There's my drafting, my review stage. Clicking on show to take a more detailed look at the drafting stage. I see that as the version creator, that would be anyone with editor permissions for quality rules for one or more functional areas can participate in that drafting stage. And their options, when they're done in that stage, their options for exiting the stage, transition actions, would be they can submit it or they can reject it and end it. Moving on, when it goes to the review stage, when they do select submit and follow the happy path, the review stage has one step, and that is utilizing an assignment mapping of data stewards by functional area to route that rule automatically, in this case to the data steward, depending on what the functional area is. So when I right-clicked on that, it displayed the assignment mapping in my other tab here, and this is the assignment mapping of data stewards by functional area. Functional areas are on the left, and my user group that maps to that on the right, typically the data steward group, but not always. And I have one that's not mapped. If you're familiar with the definitions workflow, this same assignment mapping of routing data stewards by functional area is popular to be used in the definition workflow as well. You can use an assignment mapping in multiple workflows. So that's how that automatic routing is happening. It's using an assignment mapping. And the options for that actor are to approve it, which would be the happy pass, reject it, or send it back to the requester for more information. And those 3 transition actions are defined at the bottom. So that's the administrative view of this particular rule. And again, that's the default rule that comes in your Data Cookbook. This is the most popular way that that default workflow is customized. And that is they keep the review and they keep the assignment mapping that routes it by functional area, but they add a technical review. Because in my screenshot of this slide, remember I said there's a functional part at the top and then there's a technical piece. Often the data steward or the quality manager doesn't know what the technical is. They don't know what the query language is to write that rule. And so it is passed to someone who has that expertise. And then it goes to final approval. So kind of the anatomy of the roles in that instance, drafting is the same, wide swath of people who could participate in that. Review and approve is the same. Data stewards or quality managers, they tend to be higher level people. And then when they're done, rather than going to approved, it goes to the technical people to get that technical piece put in, the query language that says, check in this column for this status of this kind of student. And that role in Data Cookbook language in your user group is typically called some kind of technical editor. In real life, their job title, they could be a DBA, could be an application manager, could be a report writer, somebody with a really good grasp of the technical schema structure of a data system. Somebody who probably doesn't know the business reason of why they need the rule, but they know how to make the rule produce what the data steward has asked for. And there's a lot of granularity in the technical skills for that. You might be specific to an application, or you might be a generalist. I see a lot of variety in who has those technical skills within an institution. So sometimes it's application specific, sometimes it's siloed into the business unit. A lot of variety there. And then the third workflow I'm going to show you, and the second most popular, is it's the same. The colors are a little different. The language is a little bit different in this example, but we still have drafting wide swath. Somebody reviews it, data steward or data manager reviews by functional area. Technical gets provided by somebody else. But then there's a security check that's put at the end to make sure that the query really does match what was asked for by the data steward, so that the appropriate data is brought back. The Data Cookbook would allow you to write a query. Let's say the rule was about gender can't be null, and the technical person really wrote the query that said, bring me back all the names of people who earn more than $450,000 at this institution. The Data Cookbook would do that and bring back that list of names of high salaried people under the guise of a rule that was talking about gender. So I've seen some institutions put a security check on that just to make sure that the query matches what was asked for at the functional level, and then it goes to approved. Obviously, if you did try to rig the system and use the query for a different purpose, there's still an audit trail in Data Cookbook. I mean, your name would be on it, so it's I don't think it's a super critical need to have the security check, but I probably see it in maybe 20% of the clients. I think in larger schools, there's just a better, they just like to have it. All right, so let's now run through this, a scenario using the second most popular. So with drafting, quality manager review, technical person, and then lands and approved. And I'll show it to you in 2 ways. The first way will be from the regular user side. and then we'll take a look at it like we did to the other rule. We'll take a look at it from the administrative module so that you can see the technical pieces of how it's built and why it works the way it works. So let's start our scenario. Let's log out, and we're going to log in as a user named Dan. Dan Helper is just kind of a generic editor. Sometimes he creates definitions. His role in Data Cookbook is more to start and suggest things. So he has created, and we're landing here on his home page, and we're just going to quickly navigate to his quality rules. He's got a couple here, and we're going to focus on graduate forwarding address must be less than 90 days. So earlier, Dan created this address because of Dan's permission and that editor level permission. He sees this create a quality rule link in his panel. If he didn't have that permission, he wouldn't see that create option. I didn't start, we already had it created. I just, in the interest of time, I didn't want to type all this in. So here we are, Dan has created it, and he's at the drafting stage. And we're going to show the workflow. There's the steps in his workflow. So Dan wants to create this, it's kind of a business rules type of rule that the advancement office needs a more accurate address in order to get a better return on the mailing that they do to recent alums soliciting donations. So they want to make sure that that address provided by the graduate has been recently updated just prior to graduation. So Dan starts the rule. He doesn't know any of the technical stuff. Let's say Dan is a staff member in the advancement office, and he gets it started and he submits it. And when he clicks submit, it has now gone to Marcy Money. And Marcy Money is a user who is the data steward for advancement. And you can see now that Dan can't do anything. He can't edit. He can't take any action because it's not his turn. It's now Marcy's turn. So we're going to log out, and we're going to log in as Marcy. And they coincidentally have the same password. So now we're logged in as Marcy. Marcy got an email notifying her that a rule had just been sent to her, and she logs in and lands on her home tab, and she looks at her task area, and here is the graduate forwarding address for Marcy. She also had a link directly to the rule in her email alert. So here's Marcy. She has the edit button now, so it's Marcy's job in the workflow to review this and decide if she wants to let it go forward. And Marcy thinks this is a reasonable request. She takes a couple other steps. She's going to relate it to a definition, because Marcy's the data steward for the advancement area, and Marcy knows that there's a definition called the student self-reported forwarding address, and she knows that that's really the same thing as the graduate forwarding address. And so she's going to take the time to make that linkage to the definition. She may or may not change the language. She could change the language in the quality rule label. I think let's leave it as this way for now. But it's an important step that data steward is able to make that linkage to your pre-existing definitions. Marcy, being a data steward, she's more functionally oriented. She doesn't know the technical either. And so when she is finished with that, she's going to submit it. There's her option to send it back to Dan if she wanted to ask Dan more questions. That's how she would go backwards. But she's good with it, and she's going to click submit. And now it moves to the next stage in the workflow. Note that now Marcy can't do anything. It's not her turn. moved on to the next step. Excuse me, the next stage. So who did that go to? So I have to look at my slide. So technicals is the person who received the rule next. So we're going to log in as tech. And tech got an email alerting him to this, that there's a rule waiting for him. He lands on his home page. We're going to navigate to his quality rules, and there it is. Graduate forwarding address less than 90 days. And tech's job is to provide the technical metadata. And tech has the edit button. And tech goes in and pulls up the schema for Banner. Tech knows that in Banner, the address actually has something to do with the diploma address. It's the address to which they send the diploma. That is really the student forwarding address in Banner language. Let's go back to my cheat sheet here. So let's look at that schema. Let's actually do diploma address. Let's bring that number of columns down. So I've got 18 columns, and I'm not going to take the time to parse this really super accurately, but here's street address line 1, line 2, line 3, city, state, etc. So he pulls in all of the pieces of that address, and he's looking for, he also pulls in this activity date is what I wanted. He also wants to pull in the activity date, which was the last time that record was updated, and there are a slew of activity dates. One of these, I'm not going to take the time now to quickly find which one pertains to this particular address. Let's say it's this one, and he pulls that in as well. But the point is, he fills out the test query, the scope query, and the research query, and pulls back, isolates the records to be looked at, and writes a query that will trigger failure based on the parameters of the rule, and also can bring back which fields does he want to bring back. He may not want to bring back the name of the person. Maybe he brings back the ID number and the date the last address was changed. And he clicks update. So the point at a high level is he uses the schema from Banner to draft that technical information so that he can run that rule against that schema specifically and come up with the rows that break the rule. He will also have to set up some things in the iData Hub platform, which we're not going to show today. But the focus today is not on the technical, it's more just on the rule, the quality rule itself. So let's move on. He also notices that Marcy didn't set the threshold, and it's not Tech's job to set the threshold. Tech doesn't know how accurate, what the threshold might be for this. So he's going to take it back to Marcy. And he's going to ask her to provide that threshold because he doesn't know what she would want that to be. So he just sent it back to Marcy. So notice Tech couldn't act there. Let's give it back to, log back in as Marcy. Goes back to the quality rules. There we are, graduate forwarding address. And now she reads the note and she provides, actually she doesn't have to go into edit. Let's cancel out of that. You don't have to go into edit mode. She could also just edit here. Let's cancel out for now. Oh, you do have to be in edit mode. All right. You don't have to be in editor mode to execute against the threshold. All right, so she's going to say, I'm going to tolerate a 5% failure rate. So she'll allow some things to be inaccurate. She doesn't have to be perfect, but, and then she submits it back to tech. So it has to go back forward through that workflow, and so then tech has to log in. He gets it again, and he has the final approval on that, and he approves it. And then the rule is approved. So the roles there, Dan Helper was the editor, Marcy Money was the data steward, and technicals supplied the technical information. Marcy Money also provided the definition of what she was willing to tolerate in how dirty she was willing to tolerate the data to be. So let's take a look at what that workflow looks like from the administrative side. So navigating over to the admin side, if I look at the drafting version, just the version creator, it's pretty straightforward. Quality manager reviews using an assignment mapping. Quality managers by functional area, so it's named a little differently. We'll pull that up, take a look at it. It operates very similar to data stewards by functional area, and you can see that even though the label of the assignment mapping is called quality managers, they did plug in a lot of data stewards in that role. They also have some generic people who do quality management, so some of the functional areas have that. And then where's my workflow? Let's close that. Here's my workflow. And then the next stage, interestingly, is also an assignment mapping, but it's technical quality experts by data system. So Tech Nichols got that rule assigned to him because he is a quality editor for Banner. So Tech is in this users group. That's why he got the tap to work on that particular rule. So in this, still an assignment mapping, but this time on the left, it's data system, not functional area, and then a variety of user groups are plugged in. Sometimes the data steward can provide that technical, and in which case you do see some data steward user groups. You also see some quality managers, but sometimes you see some quality editors as well. So they're pulling from a wide range of user groups to participate in that automatic mapping by data system. So there's a visual of the workflow, kind of based on what the person works on, the section that the different people work on. Let's go through a second example. This one is Dan Helper is creating a rule where the employee phone number must include area code. It's a employee safety issue when they send emergency text messages out. They have to have area codes, and they're getting a lot of failure in the recipients of those text messages because people got different area codes. So this time Dan is a generic worker in HR. Dan helps out in a lot of departments. So Dan logs in this time, he's focused on HR, and he has created a rule, he already created it, for employee mobile phone number must include area code. So he created this, and again, this is as far as he could get with it. He didn't know any of the technical, but he knew he wanted this rule, and so then he submitted it. And when he submitted it, this workflow is a little different because it's an HR functional area. So it's got that security review as part of it. So again, that was triggered because of the HR functional area, triggered the conditional workflow that picks up the security review. And the workflow is the same as to what we just looked at. The only difference is now there's a security review piece. So let's kind of quickly go through this. The data steward just got it, and this data steward in HR, her name is Ginny Job. So Ginny logs in. She also has the same password as Dan, which is so convenient. So Ginny logs in, navigates to her rule, employee mobile phone number. She takes a look at this. She agrees with it. She remembers to set the threshold, because that's the data steward's job. And she creates a threshold of 0, and she's going to use count. So there can be actually, you want it to be a 1. If one rule breaks, she wants to see that. So it's very, the data must be very clean. And so she's done with that, and she submits for technical. Oh, there is a difference in this rule, which is the technical is done a little bit differently. So the technical is actually using a named role instead of an assignment mapping by data system. And so in the named role, George, I think is his name. Is it George? Yeah. George is the manager. So we're going to log in as George. Because it's just in the HR, there is no data system to choose from. It's HR. There's only one data system. So George is the manager of the applications experts in HR, and George wants to personally choose who does it. And so he wants to assign this to, he's got 3 people he could choose, and he's going to choose Lisa. So now Lisa just got an email that says you need to go and provide the technical information for this quality rule. George logs out. Lisa logs in, provides that technical information. So she would, again, go into her banner and pull that in. In the interest of time, we're going to skip over that. Submit it for security review, and she's good. Security review happens to be Ginny Job. It is a single users group. There may be other people in that users group, actually, but I know Ginny's in it. And so we're going to log back in as Ginny. And Ginny's going to take a look at that rule. And she would review the technical stuff that Lisa put in, blah, blah, make sure it lined up with the mobile phone. It's not looking for salaries over $450,000. And she would click approve. And then that rule would be ready to be executed. So the anatomy of that rule, let's take a look. Let's take a look at that. The administrative side of this, going to go into the drafting mode, same as what we saw before. We're going to skip on past it. Next is data steward review. Interestingly, this one is using the very same data stewards by functional area that's used in definitions. Query technical metadata. This is where we're going to see that named role. So let's open up this step so you can see, remember, if you edit a step, there's the 3 ways that you can assign people to the step. Pick a user group, pick a mapping, or pick a named role. And in this case, we've got a named role selected. So let's open that named role up in another tab. Named role has 2 components. There's the user group of the manager, and there's the user group of the people from which they are picking from. So George, our manager, who's the application manager for Banner, is in this users group, and Lisa, and what were those other names? I can't remember. Lisa and 2 other people are in this users group, and so George can select whoever's in this users group, and he picked Lisa today. So that's a named role. It works where a specific person chooses another specific actor to play that role for that particular stage. You get a lot of control over this. In this case, it was all one data system. It was all the HR. Let's say it was PeopleSoft. It was all PeopleSoft, so he just wanted to control exactly who he gave it to among his staff. So, oh, and then the rest of it, it went to Ginny. That's right, I got one more thing to show you here. Let's go back to the rule. Boo, boo, boo. Let's go back to the rule. That last stage in the rule, that security review, it's just a simple users group. And the users group is called HR Security Review, and yeah, just Ginny's in it. She doesn't even have a backup. I mean, so if Ginny is your data steward, right, you could have also just put in the data steward for HR users group there as well, because Ginny's in that. But I like to coordinate my users group with that particular role they're playing in the workflow, even if it's the same person. I think it's just clearer to understand the workflow, but it's personal preference. If we edit this, you'll see again down at the bottom, choose one of 3 ways to assign people, and we've got a simple users group selected here. Okay. And then there's just a little bit of a visual there of what we just saw there for your records. Comments about the rule that you use, or the workflow that is used when a rule is embedded. So what do I mean by embedded? If you are in quality rules and you go to browse quality rules, this is a catalog of your quality rules, right? If you embed a rule specifically to a definition, which we encourage, let's look at, I can't remember what was my example, something about a phone number, emergency phone number. So the definition for emergency phone number, if I want, again, let's harp on the area code. If I want that to always have an area code, I might do like expression where I have to have an area code. Matching records will pass that, etc. Rule severity is normal. And then I save that and I provide, so there's that workflow, quick approval, embedded workflow. Because I'm embedded. So now if I track that particular workflow, it's just got 2 stages. Because the assumption is that you really want to move that. Let's look at the workflow. I'm the creator of it. I can also approve it. I mean, it's very fast, very clean, very fast. So if your rule is embedded within a definition, iData provides you with the ability to create a conditional around that embedded attribute and build yourself a very simple, 1-step or 2-step workflow to, sorry, that's the definition and approval, to get that very quickly approved, assuming the data steward is going to do that. Obviously, if you want something more complicated for your embedded workflows, you can build something more complicated, but the point is that embedded can be a conditional. Let me show you that over in the admin side. If I go to my workflows, just kind of pull it all together after showing you all those different workflows. Let's pull it all together here to go to quality rule approval, the list. So here's the embedded one. Here's my conditional. It's embedded. It's on the top. Remember, whatever rule is on, whatever workflow is on top, that's what's going to hit first. And if you meet the conditional, you're going to take this rule. You're going to take this workflow. If you don't meet the conditional, you're going to drop down and you're going to hit this one, which has another conditional, by the way. If you don't meet that conditional, you're going to drop down to the next one. This is actually the default one. So the order, the display order of your rules, of your workflows on this page impacts which workflow is assigned when you create the rule. That's how that assignment is made. Okay. Just a reminder that the whole process of managing your quality, writing the rule and approving the rule is just one part of it. We talked a little bit today about measuring against it. We didn't talk at all about how to fix it. We didn't talk about that today. It's just about the rule itself. So if you're a knowledge client, what's the takeaway for you? Well, the concept of a catalog of rules is a takeaway. You could create that in another platform. Second tip for you would be to, if you don't want to create a separate catalog external, a lot of applications now, next generation applications, have the ability to record and execute quality rules within the application. So now you're scattered across multiple applications and you might not know what the whole picture is for all of your rules. So assign somebody to kind of stay on top of that. And for each, you know, your different banner modules or your, even your other, you know, your admissions modules, Slate, etc., all those different applications, can you do quality rules inside each of those? And what are they and who's doing them? So put somebody in charge of some oversight there. Third thing is just generate some face-to-face conversation about quality rules and find out maybe within the applications team, somebody's in charge of the rules for that application. Bring those people together and talk face-to-face maybe once a month, maybe once every 2 months. And that will just generate awareness and visibility about rules and how they're created, who creates them, just surfaces the conversation about the rules. So in summary, quality rules are one part of your process. It's valuable to write it down as the artifact through which to manage change. Writing it down is a valuable first step. It's the starting point, even if you don't have the rest of this process. In Data Cookbook, the default workflow for rules is the same as the default definition workflow. And the most common workflow is drafting, data steward review, technical, approved.